December 20th, 1989, Panama City, Panama. In the humid darkness before dawn, long before most of the city understood that the United States had begun Operation Just Cause, one prison cell had already become one of the most dangerous objectives in the entire invasion. Inside Modelo prison sat Kurt Muse, an American businessman seized by Manuel Noriega's regime after helping broadcast anti-government messages on a clandestine radio station known as the Voice of Liberty. Across the street stood the Comandancia, the headquarters of the Panamanian Defense Forces, which made his captivity not just a hostage problem, but a rescue mission placed almost directly beside one of the regime's most heavily defended centers of power. That contrast shaped everything that followed. On paper, the larger campaign in Panama had several objectives: protect American lives, defend the Panama Canal treaties, support the restoration of democracy, and neutralize Noriega's military apparatus. In practice, the Muse rescue carried a special urgency because it demanded precision rather than mass, speed rather than spectacle, and surprise under conditions where even a few minutes of delay could turn a hostage extraction into an execution. The broader assault was set to begin at 0100 on December 20th, but the Comandancia-related portion began 15 minutes early, underscoring how central Muse's rescue had become to the opening blows of the operation. What made the mission distinctive was not just its target, but its timing in American military history. Operation Just Cause became the first major test of the newly created U.S. Special Operations Command, and the rescue of Kurt Muse quickly emerged as one of its defining moments. Later Special Operations histories would describe it as the first successful hostage rescue carried out by the Army's dedicated counterterrorist hostage rescue force, a mission that depended on joint coordination between assault troops, Special Operations aviators, and Air Force gunships already positioned to strike threats around the prison and the Comandancia. So this was never merely a prison break conducted under fire. It was a compressed test of the American Special Operations model at the precise moment Washington chose to remove Noriega by force. To understand why the raid became so famous, you have to begin not with the helicopters on the roof, but with the slow political collapse that made Panama, by late 1989, a battlefield waiting for its signal. For years before the raid, Panama had been moving toward exactly this kind of collision. Manuel Noriega had long been a useful intelligence contact for Washington, but by the late 1980s he had become something far more dangerous. An increasingly isolated strongman, under indictment in the United States for drug trafficking, accused of election fraud at home, and facing a growing opposition movement that challenged both his legitimacy and his grip on the Panamanian Defense Forces. The crisis accelerated in May 1989, when opposition candidate Guillermo Endara appeared to win the national election by a wide margin, only for the result to be annulled after regime-backed violence and intimidation. That collapse of constitutional politics mattered because it transformed Panama from an uneasy partner into a regime openly defying both its own voters and the United States. Kurt Muse entered that story from a very different direction. He was not a commando or a diplomat, but an American civilian businessman living in Panama who became involved in clandestine anti-Noriega broadcasting. Using hidden transmitters, the operation aired messages under the name Voice of Liberty, urging resistance to the regime. Panamanian authorities eventually tracked the broadcasts, arrested Muse, and placed him inside Cárcel Modelo, a prison whose location made the problem far worse. Modelo stood only yards from the Comandancia, the nerve center of Noriega's military power. In any rescue attempt, the hostage sat within immediate reach of both prison guards and regime reinforcements. That meant the United States could not simply wait and hope diplomacy would solve the problem. If war came, Muse might be killed in the confusion or deliberately executed before any conventional force could reach him. Then came the final trigger. In December 1989, Panamanian Defense Forces personnel killed a U.S. Marine officer, wounded another American, and assaulted a Navy lieutenant and his wife. President George H.W. Bush now had both the political justification and the operational urgency to act. Operation Just Cause was approved with multiple simultaneous objectives, but among special operators one mission rose immediately to the top tier: rescue Muse before the opening violence around Panama City could seal his fate. That urgency shaped the planning. This would not be a slow siege or a negotiated release. The mission demanded a direct action raid executed in minutes, with Delta Force assaulting the prison itself while Special Operations aviators and Air Force gunships suppressed threats around the target. Everything depended on speed, coordination, and shock, because once the shooting started in Panama, the window to pull Muse out alive would be measured not in hours, but in moments. The rescue plan reflected that same hard logic. Delta Force would not batter its way into the prison from the street, where guards, nearby Panamanian troops, and the sheer confusion of the wider invasion could turn a short raid into a prolonged firefight. Instead, the assault force would arrive from above. The chosen method was a rooftop insertion by MH-6 Little Bird helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, while AC-130 gunships orbited to suppress threats around the prison and the commandantia at the exact moment the assault teams moved. The concept was brutally simple. Land, breach, reach Muse before his captors could react, then get back to the roof and disappear before the enemy understood what had happened. Later accounts and official retellings would emphasize just how compressed the entire action was meant to be. The Americans were not planning a drawn-out hostage battle. They were planning a raid measured in minutes. That speed came from preparation. Intelligence on Modelo prison was built from multiple sources, including information passed from Muse himself and from others who had observed conditions inside. The rescuers knew he was held on an upper floor, and they knew there were fears that prison personnel had orders to kill him if the United States intervened militarily. That changed the moral and tactical character of the mission. Muse was no longer merely a detainee in hostile custody. In American planning, he had effectively become a hostage who might have only seconds to live once the shooting began. So the rehearsals focused on precision, on getting from rooftop to cell with no wasted motion, and on eliminating the specific guards who posed the immediate threat to his life. Shortly after midnight, as Operation Just Cause began across Panama, the rescue team moved. For Little Birds carried the Delta operators toward the prison roof. At nearly the same time, AC-130 gunships began striking nearby threats to isolate the objective and keep Panamanian forces from concentrating on the assault. The prison sat in one of the most dangerous parts of Panama City for any American helicopter crew, surrounded by enemy positions and dangerously close to the commandantia. Yet that was precisely why the raid had to hit with shock. Once the helicopters touched down, the assault force breached the rooftop access, drove downward through the prison, located Muse's cell, and forced entry when the lock did not give way quickly enough. In the violence and noise of those few minutes, the mission moved exactly as the planners had hoped. Not cleanly, not quietly, but fast enough to stay ahead of disaster. Muse was found alive, equipped with protective gear, and rushed back up toward the roof. But the most famous part of Acid Gambit was still to come, because getting into Modelo prison had been only the first test. Getting out, under fire, would make the rescue legendary. The extraction was where speed collided with friction. As the Delta operators brought Muse back to the roof, enemy fire intensified around the prison complex. One of the Little Birds attempting to lift the assault team out was hit and crashed in a nearby street. In an ordinary direct action raid, that kind of mechanical and tactical disruption could unravel the entire mission. Here it happened in the middle of a citywide invasion, beside hostile strongpoints, with a rescued hostage now physically in the team's hands. The mission was no longer just a rooftop snatch. It had become a ground escape under fire. What saved it was the same quality that had made the assault possible in the first place. Disciplined improvisation under rehearsed pressure. Delta operators secured Muse, pulled survivors from the downed aircraft, and shifted immediately from vertical extraction to emergency convoy movement. The plan had been broken, but the objective had not. That distinction mattered. In elite rescue work, a mission succeeds not because nothing goes wrong, but because the force can absorb the unexpected without losing control of the hostage. The aircraft loss also highlighted the role of the aviators. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment was still building the reputation it would later carry into places like Mogadishu, Afghanistan, and Iraq. But in Panama, its crews were already demonstrating the central truth of modern hostage rescue. The assault force only gets its chance if the pilots are willing to place fragile aircraft into the narrowest and most dangerous spaces at exactly the right moment. In Panama City, around Modelo prison, That meant flying into a dense urban target ringed by hostile fire and operating at rooftop level during the opening minutes of a major combat operation. The little bird that went down did not erase the success of the raid. It underlined its cost and the risks built into every second of it. Once on the ground, the rescue force linked up with heavier American elements moving through the city. Muse was transferred out alive, and the raiders pushed through the chaos towards safety, while the larger invasion continued to unfold all around them. From first contact to extraction, the action had moved with the violence and compression that define the best special operations raids. It did not resemble the drawn-out hostage dramas familiar from television. It was faster, harsher, and far more dependent on initiative. That is one reason Acid Gambit still stands out in the history of American special operations. It showed that a rescue mission could remain successful even after the cleanest part of the plan ended and the ugliest part began. What followed gave the raid its larger meaning. The rescue of Kurt Muse was not the biggest mission in Operation Just Cause, and it was not the one that decided Noriega's fate by itself. But it became one of the clearest demonstrations of what the post-Vietnam American Special Operations System had been built to do. In that sense, Acid Gambit was more than a dramatic episode inside a larger invasion. It was an early proof that the American military had learned something from the failures and frustrations of the 1970s and early 1980s. After Vietnam, after the failed Desert One rescue attempt in Iran, and after years of institutional reform, the United States had spent the 1980s building a more integrated special operations capability. Operation Just Cause became one of the first real wartime demonstrations of that system under pressure, and the Muse raid showed exactly what that new model could achieve when intelligence, aviation, fire support, and an assault force all worked to the same clock. Army histories of Just Cause have repeatedly pointed to the operation as one of the conflict's most memorable special operations actions, not because it was the largest, but because it compressed planning, violence, and political effect into a handful of minutes. Its legacy also rested on something even more durable: contrast. The prison sat beside the commandantia, near the center of Noriega's coercive power, and yet the Americans struck it with a force so small that success depended almost entirely on surprise, training, and individual initiative. That is why the raid still appears in modern special operations history as a textbook example of a hostage rescue conducted at the edge of a conventional battlefield. It was not a massive airborne assault, not an armored thrust, not a long urban battle for a city block. It was a focused, violent incision into the heart of a hostile capital. Later retellings, including Muse's own account of the event as a rescue that unfolded in roughly 6 minutes, only reinforced the same point. The mission speed was not a flourish added afterward for legend. Speed was the mission. Without it, the guards had time, the prison had time, and the regime had time. With it, Delta Force was in, through, and out before the enemy could turn a prisoner into a corpse. And that is why the rescue of Kurt Muse still endures in American military memory. It captured, in a single tightly compressed raid, the strengths and the hazards of modern special operations: exact intelligence, daring aviation, disciplined violence, and the ever-present chance that one bullet, one missed landing, or one delayed breach could collapse the entire effort. In Panama, that collapse never came. The hostage came out alive, the raiders adapted under fire, and one of America's fastest hostage rescues entered military history not as myth, but as a verifiable example of how preparation and speed can decide everything. If you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me for more historical war documentary stories grounded in the real record.